It's me, Chucky. My mommy is the best. Super mom, love you, much. She helps mommy get those smiles back, to get those back, and those back go back. You wait for the straw brush. Get ready for that super ugly, that super strong.
Welcome to Healing for the Soul podcast, with this being season number 6, episode number 5. If you are ever looking for a virtual assistant who can edit your social media content, grow your social medias, book clients, and much more that all businesses require, I highly recommend Sphere Rocket for all your virtual assistant needs. The link to Sphere Rocket is at the bottom of this episode. Before we get started, I'm your host, Robin Stoltman, and remember, every week, I feature different guests to help you become the best version of yourself through methods you may not have heard of or thought of. Now, today, I have my guest, Beatty thank you, Beatty Carmichael.
We've been great friends for years, you can tell.
Yes. Who is the author of The Prayer of Freedom, a science-based prayer method that helps people break free from doctors that often can't, like chronic pain, anxiety, addiction, emotional trauma, even bipolar disorder. He teaches this method at one of the largest addiction recovery centers in the U.S., where nearly 9 out of 10 women who complete his class walk away free. No more pain, no more medication, no more addiction urges. And the surprising part, many experience complete breakthrough in just days.
Beatty?
Thank you so much, Beatty. Uncovered.
You can call me anything you want. I'm good with it.
I'll just call you a sweetie. It's closer.
Hey, that's perfect, Susan. Robin.
Uncovered is that what many of the things we struggle with have spiritual roots, not just physical causes. But when you apply specific spiritual laws, those roots can be removed and the torment disappears. Today, he'll reveal the hidden reason why most people stay stuck, then walk us through the simple 3-step prayer approach that's brought real, lasting healing to hundreds, even when nothing else has worked. Let's get started. Thank you so much for being here on our show today with our audience.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for having me on. This will be fun, and love to share what I'm learning and how to get free of all kinds of things.
Well, I'm excited for this, and I'm sorry I butchered your name a couple times. I'm sure it's not the first time.
Well, it's interesting because Beatty is how most people pronounce it in England, and Beatty is how we pronounce. We always push back against the English because we rebelled years back, and so we always rebel. So it's actually any way you pronounce it is technically correct.
Oh, well, that's good to know. So I appreciate it so much. I'm doing my best to work hard on your name. So let's get into this episode of The Prayer of Freedom. You say many people feel stuck in the chronic pain, anxiety, or addiction and aren't even looking for healing anymore. Why do you think that is?
It's real interesting because a lot of times when you have a chronic issue that has been going on for years, you typically have tried, if it's a medical, physical ailment type thing, you've gone to doctors, you've gone to therapy, nothing's worked. You go to prayer and you pray and you pray and God doesn't answer. And a lot of times you just kind of say, this is life, right? And you give up on trying. And rightfully so, because doctors usually don't have a good answer on these things. And God doesn't always answer the prayer. Rarely he does. And so we learn to cope. And that coping is just to live with it and expect that nothing's going to change. That's kind of actually where I was until a few years back, and everything changed. So it'll be exciting to share what happened.
Well, I'm excited to hear right now. So, because you talked about your journey and helping others find healing, and then about yourself. So, with this prayer, it's quite unique the way that it sounds. So what first led you to this mission with your own story, the way it sounded?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I come from a line of 7 generations of medical doctors. And rather than going into medicine, I actually went into business. I didn't want anything to do with medicine. And then about 9 years ago, God pulled me back towards healing. But, I started to see people, they're stuck in chronic pain. They're stuck in anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, trauma, addiction, whatever it is. And as you mentioned, they tried everything, medicine and therapy, nothing worked. They felt hopeless. And then what started to happen, I started to think, you know, medicine and therapy have been around for a while. They're going at it from the physical side of things. And I wondered if maybe the issue was on the spiritual side. So realized if medicine couldn't fix it, then the answer had to be somewhere else. So I started looking into spiritual laws, and not religion, okay, but using a scientific approach to prayer to access spiritual laws that ancient religious texts talked about and that we could apply and test. And what I started to find, Robin, was pretty startling. I found that most of our physical infirmities are not physical at all. They're spiritual. It's a spiritual infirmity that starts on the spiritual side of us, and then it manifests into the physical side of us as a physical issue. And that's why medical science hasn't been all that effective, because they're looking at it as a physical issue and they can't figure it out. But if you just go to the other side of the coin, most of us, we're both physical and spiritual. Most people have a spirituality that they recognize. And I find that when you remove the spiritual root, then the physical issue just disappears really, really quickly.
I would agree with you, because that's just like with the hypnosis part. You're removing it's not like the mind-body connection, but it's if you remove the mind part of it, why you've got that problem at subconscious level, it takes it away. But I do agree with you on the spiritual level, because that is the area that's still, even with hypnosis, you're still leaving out the spiritual aspect of it, because we are spiritual. And that's one of the things that I've been finding as I've been reading my Bible. I'm like, so I'm very curious about these spiritual laws that you had mentioned.
All right.
So I'm like, I find a few of them when I can, but you can't deny that they don't exist, because it's kind of like gravity. You can deny that gravity doesn't exist, but it still exists.
It still exists. And that's the whole idea about a law, is it exists whether you really believe it does or not. Let me share a couple of stories just for listeners to share the impact of this, because I want to give hope. Just this week alone, I was on 2 calls earlier this week. One guy, he actually moved here from England, so he was pronouncing me Beatty. I said, yep, that's a good English way to pronounce it. And he'd been suffering with anxiety since he was 15 years old. He's now 41. And it's always there. And so I led him through this. Now, he's tried everything. Nothing's worked. I was even talking to a psychotherapist, and she said, you can't get rid of anxiety fast, because you just can't do it. And I said, well, I routinely see it go in minutes. And so on this call, I said, let me role play this with you. And in 5 minutes, his anxiety was gone. I was asking him, when was the last time you had no anxiety? He said, it's been since I was 15 years old. The whole time he's been living in it. And just 2 days ago, the same thing happened with another host, a woman, and she started her anxiety at age 7. And the same thing happened. In just a few minutes, it was gone. And what's interesting is I see this happen with anxiety, with pain, with depression. Addictions are a little bit more complicated to demonstrate on the call. Then you have sleep apnea, you have diabetes, you have all kinds of things. And I'm finding that the vast majority of these, probably 90% at least, have a spiritual root. And simply by attacking the root, then the issue really just disappears in minutes. So you asked about the spiritual laws, that you read your Bible, and we know that the Bible comments on some of these things, but I'll show you where those spiritual laws are. And I'll just throw out some passages real quick, not to make this a religious call for those who don't consider themselves religious. But the thing with the Bible is it's one of the oldest ancient religious texts around. It has the most documented pieces of fragments and sections that date back thousands and thousands of years that make it the most reliable ancient text of any text there ever is because of the vast numbers of texts. And so what it means is that the document itself that we call the Bible today is proven to be the most accurate ancient text of anything, even the Iliad and things of that sort. So the Bible teaches on spiritual truths, and there's a book in the Old Testament called Deuteronomy, and this is chapter 28. And for people who read the Bible, it's 28 verses 58 to 61. And it's just before the Israelites go into the promised land, and God says, be sure to revere me and honor my name and follow me, because if you don't, if you sin against me, he says, I'll bring on you all of the diseases of Egypt and all the sicknesses and disasters written in this book and a lot more, if you sin against me and turn away. So we see, and by the way, let me just define real quickly for the Bible, these ancient texts use the word sin, but sin isn't what you and I normally believe it is. It's not like this preacher, you're sinning, you're going to hell, that type of stuff. What it really means, very simply, is sin is missing the mark in terms of God's standard. So when God created us, he built into us, in our spiritual side, a conscience. Doctors can't find the conscience. It's not in a physical part, it's in our spiritual part. But the conscience has God's standards of good and bad, right and wrong. So when we violate his standard, then we feel guilty. And when we do something good according to his standard, we feel good and elated, right? He uses it to guide us. So when we violate his standard, all that is that's what the Bible calls sin. So I don't want to make it like it's something really shameful. Oh my gosh, don't look at me, I'm sinful. It's not like that. It's like, hey, I did something he didn't want me to do. So then you see in Psalm 32, verses 1 through 5, King David, which is an ancient character in the Bible, he is saying that when I refuse to confess my sin, my body wasted away, my bones ached, and I had no energy, and I was sick on my bed. And then when I confessed it, God healed me. If we move forward into the New Testament for our people who read the Bible, in John chapter 5, Jesus, who is portrayed in the Bible as not only a great prophet, but God himself who came down and guided us and taught us how to live and did some other things. He is at this pool where you have a lot of invalids, and he asked this man if he wants to be healed. And this man had been lame for 38 years. And Jesus says, get up, pick up your bed, and go home. So instantly he's healed. But watch this. This is the connecting point. In verse 14, Jesus finds him in the temple, and he says, go and sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. And for any of the Bible folks who read the Bible enough to recognize that, most of us pass over that thinking, I don't know what that means, but that's crazy. Why would Jesus say, go and sin no more? Well, it's because sin creates consequence. And the consequence is always something in our physical side or our mental side. It's a mental anguish, like mental illnesses, so voices in your head, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, anxiety, depression. It's physical suffering, so that could be glaucoma, lameness, just jittery, where everything's, something that's just a physical type of issue, and it also manifests in physical pain, chronic pain, joint pain, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, just muscle pain, migraines. It can manifest in allergies, relationship conflicts, addictions. So all these issues that we go through, I found all of those I've been mentioning have a spiritual root, because I've seen all of them go just like within hours or less than 24 hours, simply by handling the spiritual root. So that's what Jesus is saying, go and sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. And then we go toward the end of the Bible, there's a passage called James chapter 5, and verses 14 through 16, it's saying, if anyone is sick, here's how you get well. He says, go call for the elders. But it ends up with this one thing. He says, James 5:16 says, confess your sins, ... and you shall be healed. So here's the pattern I want you to see, Robin, is throughout the Bible, the spiritual law is, if you sin, then there is consequence. And that consequence is in the form of what I call torment, something in your body that torments your life. It's either pain, your mind constantly running, it's in relationship constant conflicts, it's in losing a job over and over again. Anything that's a pattern, anything that's consistent, anything that's persistent, ongoing illness, whatever it is usually tied to this thing called sin. And so it's only when we confess our sin that it gets removed. In other words, confessing it, the best way I can describe this is I have a daughter, and when she was young, she would disobey, be fussy. I would put her in timeout or something like that and give her time to calm down. And then when she calms down, she'll say, Daddy, I'm so sorry. I know I did wrong. And that's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for a change of heart. Does that make sense? So when she has a change of heart and she confesses that she was wrong, I put my arms around her, I love her, and say, it's time to get out of timeout now. Because I'm looking for a heart change. And it seems like God is looking for a heart change too. These things come into our life waiting for a heart change. And when we confess our sin, confess that we were wrong, that we violated God's standard, then God heals. So about 3 years ago is when I started to really uncover this. I started to document out this process. You were talking about a law, I think, using that term. I use spiritual laws. You're talking about like the law of gravity. But here's what I started to find. I'm a scientist by brain, the way I think. And just to illustrate for our people, I'm holding up a pen for my audio listeners. And if I let go of the pen, it's going to drop into my palm. And every time I do that, it'll let go of it, it'll drop. And if you did the same thing, Robin, on your end, the pen would drop. So now, using empirical data, research-backed data, we can prove the existence of a physical law that we call gravity. And just as you said, doesn't matter if you believe in it or not, it still exists because it's a law. So I started to do the same thing in the spiritual realm. I started to test these different things. And using research-based prayer, where I pray a specific way or guide people to pray a specific way, and then measure the outcome, I'm finding that when they pray a certain pattern of prayer, then the outcome is highly consistent to the tune of about 90%. So I'm able to use empirical data and prove the existence of these laws. And even though it's spiritual, it's not religious. Most people I've worked with, they wouldn't claim that they are religious. They claim they're spiritual. Even some of them may not even be spiritual. But it doesn't matter because the label of religion or the label of spirituality says, I believe a certain way. But a law says it doesn't matter which way you believe, the law still exists and it still works. And that's what I'm finding. I then wrote this book called The Prayer of Freedom, and people can get it at theprayerfreedombook.com. But I did not outline this and mapped out this pattern of how do you pray specifically. In the back of the book, I created a worksheet because I've identified 18 areas where we violate God's standards, from little things to big things. And what I'm doing at this Addiction Recovery Center, and this is the really cool thing, it's one of the largest addiction recovery centers in America. It houses over 500 women. My class is the favorite because for every 20 women who come into my class, nearly 18 of them leave with no addictions. That means their addiction urges for alcohol, for drugs, sex, pornography, gone. They leave with no chronic pain, no RSD, no joint pain, no chronic pain anywhere. No, it's just all gone. They leave with no mental illnesses. I remember one of the ladies, she was saying she was on, she'd been raped at 4 or 5 years old by her dad or by her uncle. Lots of trauma. She's had deep anxiety. She was on 400 milligrams of Seroquel a day, 200 in the morning, 200 at night, just to calm her down. And for people who know it, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just saying words. But for anyone who understands that drug, that's a lot. I mean, it was a really heavy dose. She was on Bispiron, I think it is, and Zoloft. And after going through this process, she woke up literally the next morning completely free. The psychiatrist said, hey, you don't need medicines anymore. So what I did, what I'm doing at the clinic, at the recovery center, is I'm simply giving them my book. I'm not praying for them. I'm not praying with them. I'm not guiding them. I simply give them space to do the worksheet in the back and then go through the prayer process that I've been able to identify as the way to approach this God of the universe, and simply how to confess these things. And it's all leaving. It's literally, they're all gone. In fact, let me just read you one story just to share. Comes from one of the ladies there at the center, and this is what she wrote. Her name is Catherine, and she said, "I want to thank you for the prayer of freedom. It has changed my life. Growing up, my relationship with my mom was really tough. She was abusive, and she and my stepdad would drink and get into lots of fights. By the time I was in 7th grade, she said she didn't want anything to do with me and left. That's when life began spiraling downward. By 16 years old, I was having sex with lots of boys and started getting into drugs. That was just over 10 years ago. Before doing this prayer, I was addicted to heroin and fentanyl and meth. I had a lot of worry and stress and anxiety. On a scale of 1 to 10, they were probably an 8. I've had constant allergies and sinus headaches for years, migraines 5 out of 7 days a week, and a super heavy feeling like I was carrying around an overweight backpack every day. Life has really been difficult." Let me just pause. This is standard for an addict. All kinds of addictions, all kinds of chronic pain, all kind of stress, all kind of mental issues. I mean, it's just deep stuff. And this is the typical response that I see. But the prayer of freedom and repenting changed everything. Literally, everything is gone. No more sinus issues, all gone. No more headaches and migraines, all gone. No more heaviness, it's all gone. No more anxiety or stress or worries. Literally, on a scale of 1 to 10, they've all gone to 0. Even my addictions have gone down to 0. I don't want drugs anymore. I have no urges for them anymore. And even the thought of any drug disgusts me. It's all gone.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
That is. Well, I was thinking, would this still apply to like other issues? Like, for example, like prosperity issues.
Yep.
Like, like when it comes to finances, because one of those things that I'm finding is I'm thinking it's spiritual. Like you can do so much with the mind and so much with the body. You can do so much with your habits, behaviors. But sometimes it's like I still think that there's the spiritual root of it, because I know like where I've been reading different parts in the Bible, it does talk about like the generational trauma,
Yeah.
the generational problems. And I'm like, where I'm at is I think a lot of these other issues that don't even appear to be mine, it's like I think it has come to generations before me. So what about people like that may be experiencing the exact same?
I had that
It
same
doesn't
thing.
seem like it's me.
Yeah. So let me give you now kind of what I've identified as going on. This is all based on the spiritual laws that I found in the Bible, and then I started testing it. When we violate God's standard, it opens a door. I'll call it a legal right, because when you're dealing with laws, you're dealing with legality. So when you break a law, then there's a legal issue that has now occurred. And this legal right gives a spirit a right to come in and bring torment into your life. So I call them tormenting spirits. Some people, more on the New Age or just spiritual side of things as opposed to religious, will know these very same things of spirits, and they'll call them energy, they'll call them vibration, they'll call them light and dark, okay? High vibration, low vibration, high energy, low energy. I call them spirits because that's what the Bible calls them. And I've identified 3 types of spirits, 3 categories. They all do the same thing. They're all tied to bringing torment into our life for the purpose of us confessing that we were wrong, and then they leave. And I know that's the purpose because when you confess that you're wrong, they leave. So they must only be there for that purpose. And it's sort of like God disciplining us. How does God discipline us? He brings uncomfortableness into our life until we correct our ways, and then it leaves. The same way we discipline our children. It's a complete mirror. So these 3 types of spirits, one is called an amplifying spirit. So the way this works is, let's say I blow up in anger, then I receive a spirit of anger or an energy source of anger for those for that terminology. But what it does is it amplifies anger in my life, and now I'm always angry. And the least little thing, I just blow up, and I don't know why I'm angry, and I'm just angry, and I wish I could stop it, but I can't. Why? Because now I've got a spirit that's amplifying anger because I blew up and I didn't tell God, I didn't say, I didn't confess that I was wrong. I could just say, well, I'm not going to confess my sin, just like King David did in Psalm 32. And then when you don't confess, then it says God was disciplining me. So amplifying spirits, if I start to get drunk or start to take drugs, I get a spirit of addiction. If I start looking at pornography, I can get a spirit of pornography and lust. If I get really afraid or fearful, a spirit of fear. Almost anything that is a negative emotion or negative behavior, if I do that and violate God's standard and don't confess that I was wrong, it opens up a doorway, a legal right for a spirit of that emotion or behavior to now amplify it. And that's why you can't get rid of it, because it's a spiritual issue. It's not a physical issue, okay? Then you have a second type of spirit I call an infirmity spirit. It comes in through other types of legal rights, but its purpose is to bring infirmity. This is where you have chronic pain. Like you have a friend of mine had a football injury in college, hurt his hip, and he's now my age. So 35 years he was in excruciating pain. Last several years he was on a crutch. And I led him through the same process. He confessed some sins from high school, and in minutes his hip pain was totally gone. He was walking without a crutch, and this is permanent. You know, I called him back a couple of months ago. This was 2 or 3 years ago when it happened. He's still without a crutch. So when you have chronic pain, chronic sickness, a lot of times it's an infirmity spirit that's there because we did something violating that standard. And then this gets to what you're talking about. I call it a demonic spirit. And a demonic spirit is different than the amplifying spirit and infirmity spirits. Those first two categories of spirits tend to be very benign. They have a single purpose and a single mission when we let them in through a single act of some violation of God's standard. But when we do something worse, something that God says, that's really violating my standard, then it brings in the door for what I call a demonic spirit. We see this passage in Ephesians 6:12. In the Living Bible version, it says that we do not wrestle against people of flesh and blood, but against persons without bodies. So this is now the spiritual warfare side of things. And a demonic spirit is a person without a body. Let me see if this makes sense. Robin, you and I are people, and we're spiritual. We have a soul, and we have a physical body. Our soul is our mind, will, and emotions, our memory. It's all the who we are. Our physical body is just the container that we operate in this earthly realm with, okay?
Yeah.
So a demonic spirit is a soul without a body. That's all it is. Except it is an evil spirit that all it wants to do is destroy. So what happened with me, and I see this happen with lots of people, when there's some sort of violation of God's standard that's tied to enriching yourself at someone else's expense or enriching yourself by doing something wrong, it can allow a spirit to come in that torments you on that same category by sucking away all your money and keeping you poor, a spirit of poverty, as you may call it. What happened with me, I couldn't figure it out. My business was constantly being hammered over and over and over again. In fact, watch this. You need to look for patterns. I was trying to hire one sales rep. In 2 years, I hired 30 individual sales reps. And the pattern was this. Within 2 weeks of them starting to 2 weeks of them having started, 100% of the time, something happened in their personal life that forced them to have to leave my employment. So I'd have to go back and hire again. And it's beyond coincidence. It was 100% of the time the same pattern. I finally got someone who could help me, and they could look into the spiritual side of life. And they found one of these demonic spirits coming down my bloodline, because many years back, and she knew nothing about this of my heritage, many years back, one of my ancestors was a great big plantation slave owner. And so now you're enslaving people to enrich yourself off of the backs of someone that's been stolen. God says that's a big no-no. So now you have a spirit of poverty coming down to destroy the money because it was a sin of money. Does that make sense?
That 100% makes sense.
Yeah.
That's like, I'm realizing stuff within my own family that's generational, and I'm just like, this is all true. Like, I'm finding it in the Bible, and it's just amazing. And I'm also wondering at the same time, is this very similar to forgiveness as well?
Yes. So forgiveness is the number one typical unrepented sin. It probably, I've seen, watch this, simply by someone forgiving, I've seen legally blind eyes instantly become clear focus. I've seen sciatica instantly leave. When I say instant, I'm saying well, like within 3 or 4 minutes. I've seen foot pain go. I have seen headaches and migraines leave. I've seen eczema disappear instantly off the skin. And I've even seen surgery trauma where they've just come out of surgery having set broken bones. And I've seen all that heal and they get full motion and no pain within 4 weeks after post-surgery. I've seen all kinds of things simply from forgiveness. So unforgiveness is a huge issue. Unforgiveness is just one of these 18 different categories of where these violations of God's standards occur.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because as you were talking, because that's one of the things that I recently, like, I forgave people in the past for things.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, there's a lot of people who are so-called Christians that say that they'll never forgive somebody. But it's like, as I'm reading, I'm like, well, if you want to be forgiven by God, you have to be willing to forgive. And there's a lot of people that won't forgive. And I've been working on it myself, doing it for myself, just saying, you know what, I forgive myself.
Yeah.
And so I'm listening to your method. I'm like, I want to get your book just to,
Yeah.
just to be able to help this, because that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, how many people that this could help, the more that they know about your book. And
it
so
can help a lot. And that's the whole purpose of this. And you mentioned something that's real important. Look in your life for anything that's a pattern and that's persistent. Let me throw out some examples of patterns.
yeah,
You see abuse with your grandparents, abuse with your parents, and abuse with you. Or maybe divorce, or anxiety. Anytime you see a pattern coming down the line, it's a spiritual issue. Anytime you see a pattern in your own personal life, constantly blowing up, constantly losing relationships, losing a job over and over and over again, constant pain somewhere. Like one person, she was always doing something with her feet, breaking her foot, twisting an ankle, stubbing her toe, breaking a toe, always something pain tied to feet. Or a persistent illness like sleep apnea or diabetes or mental illnesses. Anything that something is persistent and it takes away quality of life, you have almost 100% chance it is a spiritual root. And that's why doctors can't fix it. But if you take care of the spiritual side, which is what the Prayer of Freedom book is all about, then it disappears and you're set free.
I love that. That's why I asked some of those generational issues, because I'm like, would your book help with those generational
Clears
issues?
it out. In fact, let me share a really amazing story. So at this addiction recovery center, this lady, her name is Ashley, that was on 400 milligrams of Seroquel, and she had been raped at 4 or 5 years old. Her 3-year-old daughter and 1-year-old daughter had both already been diagnosed with asthma and on heavy medication for their age. And when Ashley went through the Prayer Freedom book process for herself, their asthma instantly disappeared. It was a generational issue. Sins of the mother being passed to the children.
I know that there's plenty of proof on that. They've proven it over time and time again that anything that the mother goes through while the child is pregnant, they have proven that the child carries those problems.
Yes. And you don't even have to be...
Back in the 80s, you can find books that state this.
Yeah. Medical science has identified a lot of these trends, but not all of them, because You can even be the mother now, start to do something, and it causes issues in your children, and they may be 5 or 6 or 10 years old already. It doesn't have to be in utero.
That's very true as well. So before we close our show today, what is the best way for our audience to get in contact with you?
Yeah, the best way is go through the book website. So the book's name is called The Prayer of Freedom. If you were to type it in on Google or Amazon, you'll never find it because prayer and freedom are one of the most widely used words out there. So simply add the word book at the end of the title, theprayerfreedombook.com. That's the website, theprayerfreedombook.com. There's a link straight to where you can buy it. There's some free stuff, some discounts, and some other information about the book. But you'll get all the information about me, where to contact me, how to get the book at theprayerfreedombook.com.
I love this. Thank you so much for your time and your energy while being a guest here today. I really appreciate you very much. I'm sure our audience that's listening in and watching in also appreciate. I appreciate everybody so much for listening to today's episode of Healing for the Soul podcast. And be sure to follow me, Robin Stoltman, also known as Healing for the Soul, on social media, as well as my guests. What's the best way on social media? Do you have one for the book itself?
Yeah, so YouTube, you'll find me as Beatty Carmichael Teaching.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it so much.
All right.
That's all for now, folks. Nutrition to give you for fun. Help that fall bucket to strive. Quack, quack! Bye-bye. Well, next time. Now you got it. Now